name is Laura Herter, and I am actually the program developer for the Corporate College and Community and Education. I am so pleased to welcome you all to Gulf Coast State College. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedules. This is a really important subject that we'll be talking about today, very timely. And I think, social media affects us all, but it certainly affects our youth. We have a great lineup of speakers to discuss bullying, suicide, social behavior, and its effects on the mental health of our youth. Again, I just want to thank you and welcome you to Gulf Coast State College. And with that, I will introduce our moderator, Seamus Allen.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. It's my honor to welcome you here today to Gulf Coast Community College. We have a terrific workshop in store for you with great panel speakers who will share their insight and professional opinions on mental health concerns that affect our young population. We'll discuss social media and its effect on mental health and bullying in the youth. A special heartfelt thank you to Mr. Almeski, who's sitting right here, who by profession is an architect and an urban designer practicing in Panama City, Florida. He's the president of Avicenna Free Clinic. He took time out of his busy work schedule to organize this workshop for us today. He has two beautiful daughters who I know personally, both graduated from Gulf Coast Community College back then. So Mr. Almeski, please stand up and be recognized. Thank you. I'd like to thank Dr. Abuela and the staff of Avicenna Free Clinic and Gulf Coast State College who collaborated and organized this workshop. Dr. Ayman Abuela, better known as Dr. A, in fact it's plastered on his office, Dr. A, is a medical doctor specializing in internal medicine and hypertension. He is a successful physician with a busy practice. He's one of the founders and medical directors of Avicenna Free Clinic, a clinic that serves the uninsured with health insurance in our community, with health care in our community. It's my privilege to introduce Dr. Abuela, who will speak for a short while about the Free Clinic.
Thank you, Ms. Salman, for this nice introduction. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming today for this interesting program. I'd like to thank a special thank to Dr. Bob, Ms. Aline Booth, and Dr. Weskeen for taking time out of this busy schedule. Thank you very much for coming. So Avicenna Clinic, I know the first question, what do you mean by Avicenna? Avicenna is a doctor born in 1980, upper century. Very famous physician, very famous scientist and philosopher. And he wrote a very interesting book on medicine called Law of Medicine. And this book used for many years in the medical schools in Europe. So Avicenna Clinic established back in 2011. And at that time, the population of Bay County was 150,000. 20% out of this population were uninsured. Like 30,000 patients in 2011 was uninsured. And meaning they have no access to any health care. In 2016, the last census showed our population increased by about 40,000, and 14% of this population is still uninsured, like 25,000 citizens still have no access to health insurance. And based on my humble experience, I'm adding a few thousand of people cannot afford to see physicians because the high deductible. So I believe that healthcare is a right and not a privilege. And that's why in the Avicenna Clinic we try to fill the gap as much as we can until we get the comprehensive healthcare reform that all Americans deserve. Over the last years, we were able to build a network with educational and health organizations like Gulf Coast State College, like Health Department, like Bay Medical Center Park, San Andreas Free Clinic. So, and in our clinic, we provide medical services like primary care and general medicine, pediatrics, We are only clinic in the state of Florida that provide neurology clinic. And not only that, we added also cardiology clinic, rheumatology clinic. We work also with other counties like Holmes County and establish a women's clinic as well. So besides the medical service that we provide, we also provide an education and awareness program. And one of these programs we had it 2 days ago in the Haney Institute, talking about the risk of smoking. And here today we have interesting subject talking about the mental health in the young population. I hope everyone enjoyed the lectures, and thank you very much.
Are our digital lives more important than the real ones we live? It's undeniable. We're hooked on social media, and the trend is not going away anytime soon. Social media can be extremely beneficial in a number of ways, allowing people to connect and share ideas, as well as accessing information that would otherwise be extremely difficult to obtain. But where do we draw the line? It's kind of scary to consider all the possible social problems that arise from social media. But what is all this tweeting, Facebooking doing to our mental health? More importantly, how does this impact our adolescents, our teens, our children, and most importantly, our future? Please silence your digital devices. It's not going to hurt you just for an hour and a half. We can survive without it, I promise you. Please give your full attention. Think of questions to ask the panelists. After each speaker, the audience would be given an opportunity to ask questions. For those of you who are stage shy, I did provide some paper and pencils on the side of each row of desks there where you can write your questions on paper. With that said, I'll introduce our first speaker. Mrs. Eileen Booth is a licensed mental health counselor. She has worked at Life Management Center for over 20 years, mainly as a therapist for children. For 6 years, she worked as a sexual abuse therapist. She's currently a program director for children's services at Life Management Center. Ms. Booth will speak about the impact on social media on youth. Please give your full attention to Ms. Eileen Booth.
Good afternoon. I'm going to have to wear my glasses to see my notes. Let me first say that I am a parent of a 5-year-old and a 16-year-old, so this topic is very important to me personally. It's something that I think about and monitor a lot in my own household. So when I was doing active therapy with sexual abuse victims, this issue really wasn't around. That was in the early 2000s, and I can't really imagine, I haven't done that kind of treatment since the explosion of social media as it is today, and I can't quite fathom the complications that must present. So I want to kind of approach this in a few different ways. One is to talk about brain development in adolescence, and how, in particular, where they are with their development in their brain is impacted by social media and what they're doing. So for most teens, they reach analytic maturity by the time they're in their mid-teens, 15 or 16. They can make, pretty good decisions. However, psychosocial maturity, which is a more ambiguous type of maturity, really doesn't happen until the later teens. Their experiential systems are still developing. So teens are much more susceptible, younger and older, to social and emotional factors like peer pressure, romantic attachments, things of that nature. Behavioral self-regulation, emotional self-regulation isn't really done until their mid-20s. We say that when they're 18, they're adults. They're not. I have a 16-year-old, and I'm like, you're not even close to done. So they are they have an increased susceptibilities to the effects of the neurotransmitter dopamine, which leads to increased risk-taking and reward-seeking behavior. That's just normal teen stuff. But when you couple that with what's available to them on social media and online, the dangers can be just magnified. So I looked at a 2012 Pew Research Center of 802 teenagers. Now, this strikes me because this was 5 years ago, and I know the numbers are different now, but still, just 5 years ago, these were the numbers from this research study. Of these 802 teenagers, 91% shared their photographic likeness on social media, pictures of themselves. 71% shared their city, where they live. 71% shared their school name. Let me get my glasses. I think that's a 5. Yes. 53% shared their email address. 20% shared their cell phone number. 92% posted their real name. 84% posted their personal interests. 82% posted their birth date. 62% posted their relationship status. 24% posted videos of themselves. Now, that was 5 years ago. I'm pretty confident that those numbers are different now, and they're probably higher, just based on what I see with my son and his friends. And I'm well educated on safety and monitoring and all that, and I still have to stay on it with my own child. And you know, because of the career that I've had, my son says I'm a freak because I monitor so much, but that's okay. I want my children to be safe. In that same study, 1 in 6 of those kids said that they had been contacted by someone on social media that they didn't know that scared them or said something that made them uncomfortable. 1 in 3 had received online advertisements that were inappropriate for their age. And I do see a lot of constant streaming advertisements all over social media that are very adult-oriented, but the kids are seeing. 39% admitted to lying about their age to access a website or to obtain an online account, and my guess would be that number is likely higher than that. That's just what they admitted. So for teens who are developing and their brains are still developing, one of the things that we all know is that they think in the moment. They don't really think too far out to the future. Everything is about what's going on right now, which is why they get so caught up in drama. So that makes them really susceptible to making rash decisions, and because they don't think about the consequences. And that can go so far as to things that we have seen, unfortunately, things on social media like attempted and completed suicides. It's right there, it's right here in the moment. I'm not thinking about that things could be better in a week or even in 24 hours. So because social media is always there, it's always in our face, it's immediate, it's always accessible, the ability of teenagers to make really rash decisions is compounded. And it can lead to all types of harm. There was a UCLA study, and this one was more recent. It was a small study, but they scanned the brains of teenagers while they were using social media. So they showed them neutral photographs, just random pictures, but nothing, just neutral. They showed the same photo to 2 groups of teens, but the researchers gave one photo to the group and said it had a lot of likes, and they gave the same photo to another group and said it didn't have very many likes. So when they saw the ones with a lot of likes, they were more likely to like those pictures. Same picture. If the same picture just had a few likes, they weren't interested. Now the researchers were the ones that were liking it. There was nothing attached to that, but to them, that's what drew their attention. So the takeaway from that is teens react differently to information when they believe it has been endorsed by many of their peers, or just a few, even if they're strangers. And so that goes back to one of the driving forces for teens on social media is getting likes, getting approval of whatever they're posting on social media. I mean, I know that there are apps out there that can get them more likes, which is odd, but that's what drives what they want. They want likes. So that leads you to think, if they're influenced by their peers and their peers are getting likes for things that might be risky or dangerous, they'll follow suit. Some of them, not all of them. So the willingness to conform based on what others are doing is a very strong factor with teenagers. They want to do what their peers are doing. It's a very strong influence. I mean, that was a strong influence when I was a peer, but there wasn't social media. It was a lot tamer. So this can work to the good or the bad. And what I want to convey today too is social media is not all bad. There are some wonderful, wonderful things about social media. But for teenagers or for children, for youth in particular, they need to be monitored with social media because they don't have all the regulations in place for themselves to make all the right decisions. There are peers that are doing great things on social media. They're positive. They're having a positive influence on others. They're creative. It's a great creative social outlet for some teens. And if that's who the kids are following, great. That's a good influence. But the converse is true also. There are a lot of negative influences out there on social media, and they will follow what most people are following. So in that same study, when teens were shown risky photos compared with neutral ones, this is just a brain thing which I find fascinating. There was less activation in the areas of the brain associated with cognitive control and response inhibition. The areas of the brain that are involved in decision making and can stop us from engaging in certain activities or give us the green light to go ahead with them. So the takeaway from that is seeing photos that depict risky behavior seems to weaken their be careful filter. So we have to be aware of those factors. So the next area I kind of want to go into is there are certain groups of teenagers or adolescents who are more vulnerable to influences on social media. Children who have been abused and neglected are definitely in that population. How many of you have ever heard of the ACE study? Oh, yeah. I figured you guys would hear of it. The ACE study centers around adverse childhood experiences, basically traumatic experiences in childhood. And there's a big backstory to the ACE study that I won't go into now for time, but it looks at 10 areas of functioning or situations in childhood, including if you were exposed to domestic violence, substance abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, those kinds of things. And the higher your ACE score, basically, the more trauma you've experienced, and the more likely that as you even grow into adulthood, you will suffer emotional and physical consequences, heart disease, diabetes, all kinds of things. So there was a study that looked at human trafficking related to ACE scores, and they basically found, of course, this is not surprising, that teens who had trauma in their childhood and who had higher ACE scores were much more likely to be victims of human trafficking. I don't know how familiar you are with human trafficking, but I'm not really talking about what I used to think of as trafficking. It's more of a local issue now. It's all across the United States. Basically, it's when kids are trafficked for sex or sexual things for any exchange. Like if they're given things for bribery or they're using them to sell them, and then things like that. So, but it is a big problem. It's a big problem in Florida. It's a big problem right here in Northwest Florida. We're seeing an increase of that. Human traffickers typically target minors between 12 and 14. And the social media part that kind of loops into this is the apps that they use to lure these kids. And it doesn't have to be kids who are in foster care or who have been abused. It can be any teen that are using these kind of apps. One of the things that I discovered was these folks that lure kids into human trafficking sometimes will pose as a kid of the same age as the kid, and so they think they're talking, a 13-year-old girl thinks, oh, I'm talking to this cute 13-year-old boy, when it's like a 50-year-old man on the other end. And she exposes herself and she lets him see her, and then he basically says, I'm going to tell your family what you've been doing if you don't do what I want you to do. So that's sort of how they trap them. They use apps like Kik, Whisper, Partyline, and Periscope to build relationships with teens. Yes, Kik, it's K-I-K, Whisper, and then I'm sure there's many more than this. I mean, this study was just 1 year ago, but that's a long time in the life of social media. Partyline and Periscope. You're welcome. So they basically kind of use these apps to form a relationship with teens online and then threaten them to expose them. Or they lure them to meet them somewhere and kidnap them, things like that, and get them into a life of human trafficking that they have a very hard time getting out of. Okay, let's see what else. Let's talk about some possible mental health implications. So teenagers spend a lot of time on their smartphones, and most teenagers have them now. And they like to spend a lot of time on them at night. So that can lead to, and it does lead to, sleep deprivation. And one of the funny little things about teenagers is when they're in adolescence, they kind of go back to almost a toddler state where they need more sleep than they probably did in latency age. But this is really affecting them because they're getting less sleep, because they're staying up at night, they're staying on social media, and they're having sleep deprivation, which can lead to some symptoms of depression. I'm gonna give you a little, my son would kill me, but I'm gonna give you a little anecdote on this. There's also this, they call it Facebook depression, although I'm not talking about Facebook here because my son says Facebook is for old people, so really not talking about Facebook, but I saw this in my own home, so like a social media depression, when I grounded my son from his phone for like a month. And at first he did okay, but I'm no kidding, I got concerned. I saw real symptoms of depression. I took him somewhere, and he's okay now, and he was fine when he got his phone back, but it led to a lot of interesting conversations. And that's a real thing. I wouldn't really have believed it until I saw it in my home, that he was really having a hard time being away. He felt completely disconnected from his friends, even though he was going to school during the day, but it's different. You know, the teens will tell you that's different. So the studies vary about this part, about mental health and social media. Some of them say that higher use of social media relates to higher levels of anxiety and depression. Others say they found no correlation. So can't really say for sure that yes or no, but this is a factor. And as we said earlier, social media is not all bad. For some teens, it increases their feelings of bonding and decreases loneliness. It's a good outlet for creativity and supporting causes that are important to them. I mean, I know there have been some things that have come out on social media recently that have led to like a revolution in the country with women speaking out about being harassed, and that's probably a good thing that that's happening. But then for others, they said the more they used social media, the worse they felt. And I think for teens in particular, they compare themselves a lot to others. So if you have popular teen, you know, posting all this wonderful stuff and how wonderful my life is, which, you know, adults do this too. And then you have not so popular teen or low self-esteem teen looking like, oh, look how great their life is. And I like have 3 friends on social media and they have 7,000. They compare themselves and they feel bad. So it just depends on the teen, really. So how they use social media matters. You know, if they're really using it appropriately to connect with friends in a good way, to connect with family maybe that lives across the country, that's good. That's a good thing. And it can be a benefit to their mental health. But if they use it excessively, or the thing that is concerning about adolescents is a lot of times because they want likes, they want lots of friends, they will accept friends or follow people they don't know. They all do that, and it's very frightening. So for teens who do that a lot, that can create feelings of anxiety and loneliness because they're really not connecting with real people. These are just people out there in cyberspace. It's sort of like sitting alone at a party while everybody else is having a really good time, and you're, And for teens, that's a really hard thing because they want to be accepted. They need to be accepted by their peers. So I guess the takeaway from all of this is social media definitely has some inherent dangers. And parents, guardians, whoever has oversight of adolescents and youth have got to be monitoring, and it is very hard. I cannot stay really ahead of my son. So some of the takeaways for me as a parent is we don't allow electronics at all in the bedroom at night. They have to be put up out in a main area every night, and turn on airplane mode so people aren't texting or doing whatever all night, because they will. We had our sons, when he was younger, sign a contract, basically saying, yes, we are allowing you to use this phone, but it is not your phone because you are not paying for this phone. We are paying for this phone. It is our phone. So we must always know the password, and we can ask you to look at your phone at any time. And so he does not like those rules, but those are the rules. And even that isn't foolproof because, like I said, they're very tech savvy and aware of things. So as a parent, I have to be researching all the time, trying to stay up with what the latest thing is. And I'm still surprised all the time, like, oh, I didn't know about that. So I'm constantly looking up things. And the incident with him having real symptoms of depression has really made me watch for those things, especially as they're related to what he's doing on social media and online. So I think that's all I have right now. It's a lot. This is a huge, huge, huge topic to squanch down into 20 minutes.
Thank you, Ms. Booth, for your informative talk. Do we have any questions out there?
Have you considered starting a blog for all of us? All your research.
No, I haven't, but I do love to write, so that's a thought.
I've been reading.
Yeah, it's a challenge.
I could definitely relate to the depression in children when you take away their devices from personal experience. If you want to torture a child, take their cell phone away for a couple of hours. That'll do the job. Yeah. Any questions out there?
Not really a question, but just kind of a comment where you said you did sexual assault a long time ago. You can't imagine the effects now. It's a huge effect because we have to make sure, like the three of us were in the sexual assault program, and that's a real conversation we have to have right there in the hospital before our clients ever leave. Is that if you knew who the perpetrator was and there might be an arrest, by the time you get home, we already have media there, and the pictures on Facebook, it's blasted everywhere. So we just suggest for them to go ahead and deactivate their accounts right then because it's going to. You're going to walk into the store to get a soda, and what's sitting on the register? Anybody know? County Press. Guess what's going to be right on the front of the County Press? Your perpetrator.
That's a really good point, because when I was doing treatment, they would put the information in the newspaper, and even then, the girls I worked with were like, I wish they wouldn't do that because everybody knows who his kid is, and so but then everybody knows what happened.
Well, then everybody wants to, they think like it's helping them to send the messages and tell them what's going on, and then they get overwhelmed, so then they're calling us and asking us what they should do, we like shut it down, and anything that they post, then that's the person can come back and pull all that back out, and, well, you said this, and so this still on your Facebook, so we just encourage them not to respond.
Yeah, that.
Another thing that kind of jogged me when you were saying that is kids don't realize the long-term impact of some of the stuff they're posting, and that colleges and job searches are looking at their Facebook or their Instagram or whatever to see what they're posting, and they're making decisions about whether to accept them or not based on some of the stuff they're posting. But yes.
When I do interviews, I look at their Facebook pages, and you learn a lot about a person, and not saying I make the ultimate decision on that, but it gives you insight to what the person is and what they're involved in, because they put, like you said, their whole life right there on.
And that's telling too. I do that too. But when a lot of teens they don't make their stuff private. So when I'm interviewing an applicant and I try to look at their stuff and it's private, that's a good sign to me. But teens, well, they'll leave it wide open for anybody to look at. And some adults do that too, by the way.
I have a son who's really concerned that plays a lot of online gaming, and I've noticed that
We need to use a microphone because no one hears that.
if I have to discipline and I take away the video games, it's definitely like a depression, like you were saying. His room is clean all the time, but the flip side of that is he's, very sad, and he feels so connected, and he calls the people he's playing with online his friends. So we have to then have that conversation about these are not real people in your life, and you'll probably never meet them, but it does almost overwhelming to have things separated from that social aspect.
What you were saying about monitoring them when they're in school, I have kids in college, so once they leave home, that's what worries me, is that they're doing things that maybe I'm not knowing about and I'm not seeing. So I think when they get in college, it's even more scary because you don't have them at home to monitor. Is there anything? Nothing.
Yeah, mine's not there yet, so I'm in denial about that part. But, I guess my first thought on that is by the time they're, in college, hopefully you have planted good seeds and they're gonna make stupid choices. That's what we do in college, some. But hopefully, before they go to college is the time to teach them the ramifications of their actions online.
I just see a lot of my kids get influenced by people they meet at college, new people.
Oh, yes.
So they're, I hear my daughter say, well, I know it's not right, they want me to do this, and, which she has that in her mind that it's not right, but I wonder how much peer pressure is gonna get her to, one time matter, so.
Yeah, just keep the communication as open as you can. That's what I've been doing with my son, and it does help.
What age do you think is appropriate for children to start?
30. No, I'm just kidding. I've really thought about that because I have a younger child too. And yeah, I have a 16-year-old and a 5-year-old. So I have thought about that, and like, will I do things differently with her than I've done with him? But they're very different. So that will look different when she's older. My son was probably one of the last of his peers to get a phone. And I think he was right about 13. But even then, now I'm like, 13 there's still a lot going on there that needs a lot of monitoring. I've learned a lot that I'll probably do a little bit differently.
So we're going to take one more question and then move on to our next speaker.
What are some minor signs of depression that you noticed, like that usually go overlooked?
Minor signs. It's hard with adolescents because some of the things they do kind of mirror depression sometimes because they spend a lot of time in their room, they don't really want to interact, and that's kind of normal. But actually, I was fortunate, maybe it's because I am a therapist and the way I just raised my kids, but my son actually said to me, I'm unhappy, I'm feeling depressed, I feel like he was saying, I'm disconnected, I'm all alone, and then I had to have the, you're not all alone, but for him, he's a very, very social person, so that.
One more thing. If, like you said, you have a younger child, what are some things that you would do differently? Because I know it wouldn't really be, not fair, but like harder for the parent to constantly monitor their kid. So what's the actual fix that you can instill into your younger child?
Well, I think I was a little naive with my son, and I thought that he would just not explore the things that all teenagers do. And so I didn't monitor as tightly as I do now. So I would just, he knew the rules going in, but I just assumed that there wouldn't be an issue, which was silly on my part. So I will just be monitoring more closely, probably with her. My son jokes because she's younger that she gets away with more, and maybe that, I don't know if that's true or not, but he said, yeah, she'll have a cell phone by the time she's in 3rd grade. I said, no, that will not happen. So I just think setting limits, I do it now. She's 5 years old, and she asked me yesterday, could she have her own iPad? And I said, no, ma'am. I let her use ours with limits, and she's only allowed to use things that I like kids apps that I set limits on. So she already knows that there's limits.
Okay, wonderful. I love this conversation, and we'll continue it with our next speaker. We are pleased to welcome our very special guest. Dr. Susan Bulk is a board-certified psychiatrist and psychiatry and neurology. She has more than 20 years experience working with children, adolescents, and adult psychiatry. She runs a successful private practice located on 11th Street, where she specializes in behavioral and emotional problems in children. And today she will be sharing her professional opinion on social media, its impact on children and adolescent mental health, steps to avoid dramatic actions, and tips to manage the negative effects of social media. Please help me welcome Dr. Bulk.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you for organizing this. And I very much enjoyed listening to Eileen also. Some of the things that I'll address are in some ways in follow-up to some of the topics that Eileen presented. But I'm going to get to the social media aspect after I introduce my philosophy of treating children. The first thing I want to say is I want to get back to the question on what age would we recommend that we allow our children to have cell phones. My daughter is in her mid-20s now, and as she was growing up, probably about when she was 7 or 8, she said she wanted a cell phone. I said, no, thank you. And she said, Mommy, how old were you when you got your first cell phone? And I said, I was 32, honey. So I agree with you. Some of the things that I'll be talking about are really flow directly from my patients. And one of the things that I'm so grateful about is that after 20 years of being here in town, and probably 30 years of treating psychiatric patients, I've learned so much from them and their families. So first off, I'm going to introduce what is a child psychiatrist. When I meet children, I tell them that I take care of teenagers and children who are having a hard time with how they feel, how they act, or how they learn. And that's a very easy concept then for children. I say, is there any problem with how you're feeling inside yourself? Any problem with how you're acting? And they can understand that. I will say this, though. In treating children, one thing that I've learned is sometimes when children feel badly or don't feel normal, they don't know that the way they feel isn't normal. They haven't had enough experience with life to know what normal is. So sometimes they don't realize that they're depressed or anxious or some other way not feeling good. And even if they know that somebody else looks like they're feeling better than I feel, they may not know the word to describe how they feel inside of themselves. And so very frequently, we have to watch the behavior of children. It's their behavior that tells us whether it's frequently their behavior that tells us whether there's an emotional problem. Their goal in treatment, one of the goals for many of the kids who I see in treatment is to, number one, help them to recognize what their emotions are. Number two, help them to find a way to communicate their emotions effectively, whether that's verbally or in writing or creatively. And number three, find ways to comfort themselves, find better coping skills. Very often that involves things like play, reading books, group interactions with kids and their parents. And that presents play. Play is going to be an important part of what I'll be talking about. One of the phrases I learned in my training is, play is the work of children. Children learn how to master the world, practice being in the world through their play. That's why toddlers have little toys and they play house, or they put the little toys on the school bus and drive the school bus around. They're beginning to develop a mastery of their world through their play. The reason I mention that, of course, is that one of the things that I'm concerned about is as our children become increasingly attached to their electronic devices, their play time is diminished. And we'll talk more about that in just a minute. And another something that I want to address as I move towards the social media topic is my work with children and families almost always involves the family. The child does not live in a vacuum. Anything that I want to do to help the child has to involve the family, assuming the family supports. Eileen mentioned the possibility of depression related to both the use or withdrawal from social media. And I think one of you had a good question, about minor symptoms of depression in children. One of the things, and we can talk about this forever, I don't want to go into too much detail, but the phrase that I've taught many, many people in the past is this: irritability is the hallmark of depression in a child. So I tell my students, the child who is very irritable, I'm a very, very patient person. The child who makes me want to grab their shoulders and shake them, that child, I cross my hands and say, okay, Susan, remember, irritability is the hallmark of depression in a child. That irritable child is expressing through their behavior their emotional discomfort. And so all teenagers, can be irritable, but that pervasive, meaningless irritability is often a symptom of emerging depression. So now let's move on to the social media option. I have a concept that I discuss with my patients. It's called healthy habits for children. It's based on something that pediatricians in South Florida created several years ago. And it's a fairly easy thing to remember. And it addresses social media as well as a lot of other things. The name of this intervention is the numbers 95210. So I often write out the numbers and say to the child, let's talk about these numbers. Let's think about the number 9. There is something that is a healthy thing to do that you could do for 9 hours a day. What might that be? Anybody know? Sleep. Yes, sleep. And we'll talk more about sleep in a minute too. 9 hours of sleep. 5. Say to the child, there's something that you could do every day, something that you could maybe put into your body every day that has the number 5. What would that be? Anybody have an idea? What was that? Fruits and vegetables. Good job. I like too. So, Johnny, there is something that you could do no more than 2 hours a day to be healthy. What might that be? Screen time. Screen time. It takes the breath away from many children. iPad, computer, TV, cell phone, yes. Pediatricians are opening it up a little bit now, but my format is still 2 hours of screen time a day. And I'll go ahead and finish up the 1 and 0. So Johnny, there's something that you could or should do at least 1 hour every day to be healthy. What might that be?
Exercise.
You got it, you guys are great. And 0. So Johnny, there is something that I would like you to do none of every day, something that you might put into your body. Drugs for sure. Hopefully. Younger kids, recommend 0 sweet drinks. Sweet tea, lemonade, and I often say none or almost no sweet drinks. And it's amazing how kids can lose weight when they stop drinking sweet drinks. 1 was hour of exercise. So I often, begin the discussion with this concept 95210, and kind of get the kids involved in figuring out what these numbers mean and how they can implement in their lives. I am very much in agreement with Eileen about the developing brain and how intensely sensitive it is to all of the things that we subject it to. I'm very, very concerned about the very poor nutritional content of most of the kids in our community, probably all around the nation. Very concerned about their exposure to electronics, their lack of play, and how their real world they begin to think that their real world is their electronic world. So some of the strategies that I've come up with parents to kind of help address their media time are these. Some families will say, first off, fairly responsible. Computers in the living room can prevent a lot of things. But you keep doing, you just lost your computer's privilege. Hands up at any time. And moms have to do it, moms or dads. Some of the kids who I see, I recommend they buy access to their electronics through hours of other activity. So you might have an hour on Minecraft, go walk the dog for an hour. The walk comes first, then you get an hour on Minecraft. And I, of course, I prefer if it be some kind of exercise, but even if it's not, if it's doing some chore or whatever, what we're helping them to do is develop some balance and not be too preoccupied with the screen. A lot of experts recommend that we enforce hours or days of media break. So go camping at St. Andrews and the cell phone stays at home. Or kayaking. But hopefully they won't take their cell phone with them. But it's really important that there be times when the electronics are gone. A lot of parents are very adept with parental controls. Honestly, I'm not, but most parents have done essentially what Eileen recommended, which is your words were almost exactly mine. That cell phone is my cell phone. I allow you to use it. I know the passwords, and I can have access to it at all times. It's very important that parents do that. Also, the devices, again, Eileen got it, should sleep with parents. Or well, public areas are great. I usually recommend the devices sleep with parents. And then I talk with the kids about that, going back to sleep. The electronics emit a particular blue light that activates a part of our brain, and that part of our brain helps to determine circadian rhythms and keeps us awake. So if the kids are using their phone right up until bedtime, the blue light has activated the brain, so it's hard to fall asleep. Even if they keep the phone with them and they think they're going to sleep, they're going to wake up when it dings, when somebody texts them in the middle of the night, take a look at the phone, their sleep is disrupted. It's really important to tell families, turn off the phone at least an hour before bedtime, and then the phone and all the devices, sleep with parents. Or sleep in the living room is fine with me too. unfortunately, many of my patients would not leave the phone alone if it were sleeping in the living room, but they are more likely to leave it alone if it's sleeping with their parents. I will say that, as Aileen did, that what I've witnessed is that for some young people, their access and exposure to friends electronically is life-changing in a positive way, okay? I treat people, say, from Panacea or Caravel, who may have very few peers. And for some of them, their ability to be in contact with a support group online who might be more likely to be kids like them is very positive. And I'm happy for them as long as it's responsible. Now, on the flip side, I've also repeatedly witnessed children have social groups online, and the social group has kind of orchestrated some bullying directed at one of my patients. Not one patient, several times I've seen this. And then when that social group kind of in unison implements the bullying of the patient, it is absolutely devastating to the children. And in all honesty, I've seen children become suicidal because of online bullying. And typically when that happens, the best thing to do is along the lines of what one of you said, end electronic access. Allow that child a long break from electronics. I've seen this a few times. It's been very interesting then how after we remove the electronic access, the child initially feels lost, doesn't know what to do with themselves, and then gradually begins living real life again and developing new interests. I often tell the kids this is the perfect time to learn to play a new instrument, learn a new sport, do something that you can really immerse yourself into. I tell my families, along the lines of what Aileen said, that their children's brain will continue to grow until they're 30, 25 to 30. And again, I feel passionately about how important it is that we help to provide balance in their life as they're growing up, so that devices and social influences don't negatively and irreversibly change the trajectory of the kids' lives. So related to that, I want to get back a little bit to depression and anxiety. So I see children with depression and anxiety caused from multiple things. Sometimes it's electronic access, sometimes it's other things. I have treated children who literally posted online while their parents were sleeping, posted online that they were killing themselves. So their friends then call law enforcement. Law enforcement comes to the house, wakes up the family to say, hey, by the way, your daughter just took an overdose upstairs or whatever. Anyway, I won't go into that anymore. I want to get back to depression and anxiety. This is what I want people to know about treatment for depression and anxiety. If a child has mild to moderate depression or anxiety, either medicine or counseling are equally effective to help that child. So most families, most attentive families will say, hey, let's get our child involved in counseling, and that's a wonderful, wonderful way to go. From moderate to severe depression or anxiety, the most effective way to help a child or an adult is a combination of medicine and counseling. And what I tell families about that is sometimes the child is so severely ill that he literally can't benefit from the counseling because of the severity of his illness. And sometimes the medicine can kind of jumpstart the child towards healthiness so that then he can benefit from the interventions, the counseling interventions. I remind many families that untreated anxiety, because of the biological changes it causes in your brain, leads to depression. And I remind many families that depression can be a fatal illness. So I want people, first off, to be healthy and balanced and have healthy habits. I want people to recognize symptoms of imbalance in mental illness, and obviously want to promote treatment. Let's see. Okay, I think I'm done. Any questions?
I think I have a question for you. When actually you start to predict the child is having a mental illness problem, and how we can prevent him, or how we can guide him to reach a level which will not do in the future dramatic things, which like what we see in Las Vegas and things like that. So how we can prevent that?
Great question. Okay, first thing I say is, when a symptom begins to cause marked emotional distress or interfere with functioning or development, that's when we say we have a problem. So if I'm a little bit compulsive, I need to line up my margins and keep my paper neat. As long as it's not interrupting my life, it's okay. But when I get so compulsive that I spend 3 hours erasing my page and I can't get it perfect enough to get ready to turn in, then I have a problem. That's just a silly example, of course. But when a problem causes marked emotional distress or interrupts functioning or development, then we say we need to treat it. Second thing is, the earlier the treatment is started, the better. So the analogy I use is obesity. And it's simple, it's simple, but here's what I say. If I see an obese baby, and that obese baby becomes an obese toddler, and an obese elementary school child, I'm pretty sure that child will be an obese teenager and obese adult. If I see an obese baby, becomes an obese toddler, but in elementary school we're able to help that child to be not obese, there's a greater likelihood that child will become a normal-sized adult, normal-sized teenager, normal-sized adult. And I tell families that that's because of the biological changes that the child experiences through the process of having a normal weight. The same happens emotionally. If we have a child who's experienced, change it. If we have a 22-year-old who's had 15 years of anxiety or depression, yes, I am happy to try to treat that 22-year-old, but it will be much more difficult than if I see a 7-year-old with 1 year of depression and anxiety. And what I and other child psychiatrists witness is many times when we treat children for mental health illness, they respond quickly, and even though that illness might be a chronic illness in an adult, sometimes after a year or two of treatment, that illness appears not to be chronic for a child. Their brain, my simple analogy is, we have retrained their brain what normal chemistry and functioning is. So the earlier the better.
Thank you, Dr. Ball, for that great presentation. I definitely can say I learned a lot. Next time I walk into the room, I'm going to have my son put his hands up. Okay, so this brings us to our third speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, he's definitely impressive. Mr. Wesley Ryan Keene is the chairperson of the Social Science Division and Associate Professor of Psychology at Gulf Coast State College. He hosts a podcast and a radio show called Positive Psychology of Pop Music, and also provides workshops and professional trainings on a wide variety of topics. Mr. Wesley will be speaking to the social and psychological constructs and contribute to bullying and what we as a community can do to prevent them. Please help me welcome Mr. Wesley.
Thank you very much for that. I've been teaching here for 12 years, so I'm really bad behind a podium and with a microphone, so I may move away. If you move back, just let me know, and I'll try to talk as clearly as I can. I have been teaching here for 12 years, and I teach mostly general psychology courses. So these are students who are just fresh out of high school or coming to college sometimes, no prior experience in this kind of setting. And so they think when they get to my class, this is going to be awesome. you're going to tell us all about the crazy people in the world, how we can avoid them, and how we can stop them. And I immediately say that's not at all what psychology is. My background is in clinical psychology. My master's from Virginia Tech in 2004. So my area of expertise at the time was individual counseling, that study of mental illness. But when we talk about psychology in everyday language, my lab was an applied psychology lab. So it was about learning these principles, these famous studies, and how they can apply to everyday real life situations and how we can help each other. So I like honesty and I like real world application. So I'm going to start with lots of honesty here. Raise your hand if you've ever bullied someone before in your life. I love that honesty. It's a lot of hands around the room. I bullied someone when I was 7. I was a particular jerk when I was 7 years old. Karma would come back and bite me very strongly on that just a few years after. But I think we have to be very honest about the fact that some of us have contributed to that specific problem, myself included. Raise your hand if you're responsible for bullying in some way, shape, or form. And I'd actually ask that we all raise our hands with that. When I say responsible, I don't necessarily mean that you are supporting a bullying environment. I mean you're part of the solution. This is not a situation where we can just say, we got to find the bullies, we got to tell them to stop, and we got to tell our kids, our students to report being bullied. It is a massive, complex web of social phenomena that allows us to continue. You see this with shootings, you see this with abuse, with sexual assault. It's not as easy as saying, just stop it, or tell people to stop doing it. We've all got to be a part of that solution. So when I talk to my classes, I talk really about that applied part. I also share a lot of my personal experiences. I was bullied a lot in middle school and high school. I was suicidal all through high school and through college. So this is very, very important information for me. It means a lot to be very passionate about it. I think we all have to be passionate about it because every single one of you know someone who has been in that situation at some point. They may never have told you that. You never maybe have guessed it. But I guarantee you know somebody who is vulnerable right now. So it's really up to us to kind of think about it that way. I like what you said about it being a vacuum. So no instance of bullying or abuse or anything occurs in a vacuum. It's not just the family context, it's that community context. And so what I'm going to try to do first is talk about some things that prevent us from stopping bullying when we see it. And then I'll also talk about some ways that we can prevent it from ever happening, because that's really the solution, right? You don't just want to have firefighters putting out houses. You want to have great community standards that prevent fires from ever starting. So that's kind of the approach that I like to take with that. I just want to talk about 5 different types of bullying. I am going to try to focus on a social media point of view, but hopefully what I say can apply to lots of different bullying. There's obviously the physical bullying that we typically see on the news, or this is the type that usually gets reported. This is people being hit, people being thrown into lockers, that kind of bullying. But what can be just as devastating is the verbal bullying, people saying negative things to you or about you. Obviously now we live in a world where social media is a different avenue or a different path for all of that. And it's interesting, you know, I got my first cell phone when I was 24, and it's just interesting seeing in the last 10 years, my students now have had their entire lives. So whereas to me, it's a component of my life that I sometimes engage in, to them, they don't view that as any different from their verbal interactions or their interactions with me as a question. They would rather email me or text me all day long about assignments than have a one-on-one conversation with me. That seems like the hardest thing in the world sometimes. So for them, it's not this component of their life, it's interwoven into all of their lives. So that written kind of bullying becomes even more potent and even more present. So with that, again, I just kind of want to talk about why people don't help. One of those obviously is fear. So this sometimes can take place primarily in that direct abuse situation. I was on a subway in New York a couple of years ago, and there were maybe 12 people in the subway train. And an individual got right in my face and was yelling slurs at me and threatening my life, telling me he was going to kill me. This persisted for about 25 minutes straight of nonstop harassment. I was very terrified, and at that point I just kind of shut down and okay, just don't respond, don't do anything. Like I said, there were several other people on that train, and just looking around, there were people texting, there were people reading the book or the news. One person started to get up and come my way. It was a 14, 15-year-old girl, and I immediately put my hand up and I said, no, don't do anything. I did not want her to get involved. But it struck me as very fascinating that she was the one that felt like it was not okay for this to be occurring. So, I think it's a really important thing to focus on is the fear. I never suggest putting yourself in a dangerous situation, but sometimes there are things that you can do to have a direct impact in that moment. So if you are in a school or any kind of environment where you see somebody being bullied, get someone else to go in with you and intervene. Don't do that alone, if at all possible. Also have your phone ready to go. I have intervened in a situation before where I said, I have the police number on my phone right now, and my phone is very quickly going to hit send if you do not stay away from the situation. And I was prepared to do that, and luckily for me in that one instance, it did stop that situation. So again, don't put yourselves at risk in such a way. I'm directing you to do if you choose to do so to help someone else. That's your call. But fear is a lot of why we don't help, but it's not the only reason. Diffusion of responsibility. Has anybody heard that term before? Some of my students are here, so they're going to hear it next week probably. But diffusion of responsibility is a huge problem with bullying, not just physically, but also in the social media context. So the more people who are around when someone is in trouble, the less likely you are to get help. One of my buddies at Virginia Tech did a study where he would have a whole bunch of books and he'd be walking across campus and he'd just like throw his books and fall on the floor. And there were researchers standing by watching to count how many people would go up to him and to count how many people were in the surrounding area. And sure enough, the only time anybody ever helped him was when they were the only person in the immediate area. So we have to kind of be aware that the thought process is somebody else will help. How many times have you seen somebody on the road driving and they look like they could use your assistance, but in that split-second decision, you make the decision to just go on by? I've done that before. And the thought that probably makes you feel more comfortable is, I'm sure someone else will stop. But to address this problem of bullying, we have to assume that no one else is going to step in. You may be the only person that does anything about it. And so that kind of empowers you to make that call to be a helpful person. Also, conformity is a big deal, especially with our children. If they're in a situation in the lunchroom or the playground, and they see a lot of people, let's start with this, they see someone bullying someone else, just a one-on-one situation. If they look around and everybody else is ignoring it, they may do that as the social norm. Well, that's what we do. We're supposed to just pretend like this isn't happening. So that's what I'll do. But it also can go in the other direction, where if a lot of people are agreeing with what's happening, they can absorb that as the norm. Oh, this is okay. Particularly if there are adult role models around who are not intervening, then that's a very powerful message that it's totally okay to be doing this. And again, I think you talked about just that shaping, if the analogy of obesity, if you're an obese child, that can follow you throughout your life. So our kids are learning very salient and powerful messages that may stick with them for a very long time. Also, cognitive dissonance is a big topic that I like to talk about with my students. A lot of times we think that our thoughts drive our behavior. Sometimes they do, but it's also often the case that we behave, and as a result, we subsequently back up and change our perspective on things, and that can be very dangerous. If a situation is set up and it creates a behavior in you, it can cause you to change your viewpoints, your morals, a lot of different things about you. So if you don't help in a situation, you may think to yourself, I'm a helpful person. I would have helped if it was necessary, or if that person deserved help. I didn't help, so they must not deserve it, or it must not have been that significant. So your mind can have a way of tricking and convincing yourself and changing your perspective on those things immediately. I will try my best to avoid politics. I will probably fail epically at that, but I don't think I'm being a responsible educator if I'm ignoring some of these things. But if you support someone in your family or in your school or your church or in politics who has viewpoints that you agree with, but then they start engaging in bullying, you may think, well, I like this person. They're a good person. I see them every week at church. I see them come to staff meetings. They're good. So they wouldn't do something that's bad. I'm going to continue to support them. And then that normalizes this bullying behavior that they're displaying. So again, you think, well, I would support this person and I would intervene if it became a problem. But our mind can trick us into not doing that. And then all of a sudden we find ourselves supporting someone that 2-3 months ago we would not have supported that behavior from anyone. But here we are. And then obviously identifying if you agree with what the bully is doing, you will not step in. If you agree that harming someone aggressively and physically or even social media is okay, you probably wouldn't be here trying to learn about how to stop that. But you may agree with the ignorance or that hatred that's the target, or that's the arrow being thrown at the target. And so that may cause you to not step in. Again, I'm assuming that because you're here at a workshop on how to reduce bullying, that most of us are on the same page with that. But we really have to kind of make sure that we're not identifying with those harmful ideas. I do want to talk about 5 ways to stop all this from happening. And the first, obviously, is reporting. I have been on several committees at different places I've worked where I've been in the capacity of being a part of the team that makes a decision about what to do with someone who is engaged in bullying or who is engaged in some kind of misbehavior on campus or in the workplace. And what almost always happens is when you finally get a report and you start investigating, this person's behavior has been out there. This was not the first time that something like this occurred. You've all seen the news stories. You're all watching the same headlines that I am, where it's not as if one day, most of the time, somebody just displays this completely out of character behavior. There are seeds, there are things that we could have seen, that we have seen, that we just didn't do anything about. So you really have to report these instances. If your kid is being bullied on social media, and you know that the classroom is involved in some way, report that to the teacher. You can report individuals to Twitter, to Facebook, to Instagram. You can actually flag posts. You can follow up with an explanation of why. So we can all kind of take responsibility for that. I flag stuff on Twitter and Facebook all the time if I think that something could hurt someone's feelings or somebody is the target of abuse. So it's just important to kind of report that. The graduate school I went to, Virginia Tech, I left that school it was May, and then 4 months, I think it was about 4 months later, that's when the Virginia Tech shooting massacre occurred. My best friend was walking to that building. And so when we started looking at the individual who committed that atrocity's background, there were signs there. So I've been to Pulse, the nightclub in Orlando where the shooting occurred. So to have 2 locations I'm very familiar with happen and have these tragedies occur, it makes it real for me in a way that I hope it's never real for any of you if it's not already. But I can tell you, the same thing that causes a behavior here in our community can have the same consequence that it has that you're seeing in the news right now. So just take everything like that seriously. We all have to do that. Also discuss these things when you see a family member, or you see a community member, or you see a politician actively bullying through social media. Talk about that with kids. Talk about why they think that's happening. Talk about what their feelings are about that, what their emotions are about that. Talk about how that might affect their behavior, how that might model your interaction with them. It's a great way. I do not have kids. I meant to preface with that. So I don't have children. But as many rules and guidelines as we set, they will find their way to things that we don't expect them to or want them to. So anytime that happens, it can be an opportunity for discussion. And it's like I said, we have to call it out when we see it, or our children will kind of believe what they're saying. Are we okay with the first 2 reports and discuss? Are we all on the same page there? Those are the 2 easy ones. So the next 3 are a little bit difficult. The next one is to reflect, and that's because we live in a society that's defined us by labels, all of us, whether it's your gender, your religion, your race, your sexual orientation. We have been grouped with other people who may not be like us personality-wise, but one word has been linked to make the assumption that we are all the same, and that feelings towards someone who is that word should be shared towards everyone who is that word. We learn that from a very young age in our culture. So we have to kind of be aware that we have to reflect on what prejudices we might have. We're all human beings. We all have flaws. We all have issues. We also have to look at the groups that we're a part of. So, if I'm part of a community group and that group has a negative idea about someone because of their religion or their sexual orientation, then I need to be aware of how that might be affecting my interactions and how that might affect the messages I send to my children in some capacity. That's not easy to do. I've been reading a lot about privilege the last few years, and for so long on my show or just in conversations, I would say I don't do politics. I hate politics. It's divisive, it's negative, it makes me sick to my stomach, it depresses me. I don't like politics. And then the last few years, what I've realized as I've seen some things play out in the news is that my privilege allowed me to pull myself out of those situations. Because of my gender, because of my race, I didn't have to deal with some of the things that people do on a daily basis. So I was able to just check out from that and pretend like it wasn't a reality. And because of that, I'm complicit in situations where I could have stepped in, or I could have said something, or done something. And I try to own that, not to put myself down, but to recognize the opportunities I have in the future to intervene, to act, to make a difference. So that's not always easy to do. Education, I went to school a lot. I like school, obviously. I'm still in one, 32 years after I first walked into one. So I love education. I read about things for pleasure. I look up topics for my own benefit. But I have to be willing to admit that there are things I know very, very little about. And I have to seek out unbiased information. That's another thing I try to teach my students, that I know so many of you parents are teaching your children. Just because something says it's news doesn't mean that it is unbiased or accurate information. It's so tough for them to distinguish these days, because I can get online and create a whole post about something I know nothing about, and it's indistinguishable from an expert's. So we really have to train our kids and ourselves to be better consumers of information, just to make sure we're knowing what we really want to. The best example for me right now that I talk to my students about is gender identity. So when we talk about populations that are being bullied, transgender individuals are at the top of that list right now. They're being murdered, literally being murdered because of who they are. Rights are being taken away from them because of who they are. And all of that is terrible. But on the basic foundation level, they are constantly exposed to words, behaviors, and actions that undermine their self-esteem and their identity in ways that we all do that we're not even aware of. When I walk into a room and I say, thank you guys very much for applause or support or acknowledgement, probably that sense doesn't sound weird at all. But if I walk into a room and I said, thank you ladies for your attention, for your applause, what have you, your ears would perk a little bit. Did you just call me a lady if I identify as man? What's that about, right? So we have vernacular, we have vocabulary built into our society that is male focused, it is gender dominant, and we have to be willing to acknowledge that. When I first started teaching, I love groups, I do a lot of group work. I apologize to my students for that quite a bit, but I'm a really big fan of it. But when I would put students in a group when I first started, I would say, let's do boys versus girls today. Let's put this group of boys over here and this group of girls over here. What never occurred to me is if I have a student who is either in the process of figuring out how they identify, or maybe they have already figured out how they identify, they just don't want that to be public knowledge at the moment. I put them in an extremely uncomfortable and compromising situation without ever thinking about it. Because I grew up, our teachers put us in boy and girl groups all the time. It never occurred to me. But that was a huge problem. And I don't know if I really lost a student somewhere along the way because I put them in that situation. So I use that as an example because that was tough. I say guys still to this day, and it's been years since I've tried to force myself to stop saying guys. I'm hopefully more aware of it now, hopefully do it less. And when I see a student, I try very hard not to put my assumption of what their gender is on them. So if a student in a question asks the class and they look male to me, I try not to say what he just said. I try to say what they just said. That requires a lot of mental effort for me because I'm not used to it. But to really get at the problem and to really stop all this, it's not just telling people don't bully transgender individuals. It's making sure I'm educated and it's making sure I'm aware and vocalizing my support for those individuals. So again, with social media, you can do things on Twitter. Someone mentioned that it's been great to bring awareness to specific causes. What you're seeing right now in terms of women uniting in terms of sexual harassment is such a powerful movement, and it is empowering so many people. So that's a way that you can very quickly, just by clicking a button, be a part of a positive and supportive movement. So just kind of to wrap up my part of it, I was bullied a lot as a kid directly, and nobody ever stepped in. There was one moment where my high school Spanish teacher, some kid was calling me gay. I was. He didn't know that at the time. I didn't know that at the time. But he had bullied me a lot, and she kind of made fun of him in a weird way. But that's the only moment in all of my years of being bullied that anybody ever stepped in directly. And if they had, I don't know if I would have recovered from my self-esteem, if I would have recovered from the suicidal thoughts more easily than I did. But what was a bigger problem were the negative messages that I was exposed to on a daily basis. I would hear things from my church, I would hear things from my friends, I would hear things from my parents who are supposed to love me for who I am. And I would hear things that made me want to kill myself. And they didn't know better. They weren't educated on it. If they had been, I'm sure they would have stepped in. It's heartbreaking now to talk to my parents because they would tell you, they'll tear up immediately when they talk about it. I've been out to them for a long time, actually, probably over 10 years. And now they're okay with it, they're educated, they understand, they accept. But there were years where they didn't. It took a long time to get to that. But they will look at me today and just cry and say, we're so sorry that we weren't there for you. We apologize. And it breaks my heart for them because I know if they had known what they know now, they would have stepped in a second. If they had been aware of what was going on, I know that. So I just don't want any other parent or myself or anyone to have to go through that experience of realizing they were a part of somebody's low self-esteem or suicide, just their difficult life, because every single one of us has the opportunity to step in and help a kid who may be dealing with this. That's the end of my index cards.
Thank you so much. That was terrific. Do we have any questions?
I have a question. I don't need a mic, I can speak pretty clearly. I think maybe for about I'd like to ask a few people at the front, not you guys, but if basically I heard a lot of talk starting with, I came in a little bit late, the second speaker and then the last speaker about identifying certain issues and seeking treatment for them, and how sometimes those issues are clear because if it inhibits your normal functioning of life. You mentioned the Virginia Tech shooter and how he had a history and how he had certain flagging points of his life that could have identified him as a troubled person. But in fact, we have so many troubled youth today. And how do we really identify those people without causing like another Red Scare with these type of issues, or another like Salem witch hunt kind of epidemic where now we're all identifying, oh, he's a potential like mass murderer, or he's a so on and so forth, because retrospectively we see those red flags, but proactively it's really hard to identify, I think.
I think that's a great point because we often stigmatize mental illness in our society. So, when I talk to students about schizophrenia, their assumptions are based on one or two movies where there was a serial killer who was diagnosed with that, let alone the symptoms of the movie are completely off base. So from my perspective, it's just about reaching out and educating. And if you see somebody who's troubled or having issues, it's about helping them. And by doing so, you may steer off a negative event or a tragedy. But if you come to each one of them as, how can I help you? Then I don't think that puts any negativity on them in that specific moment.
I think that what you're also alluding to is there's a likelihood that people need treatment before they reach a certain level, a critical level. And one of the major challenges the country is having is providing treatment for the number of people that need it. Eileen and I are very familiar with that. And it's a financial issue. Also, it has to do with professional resources, but of course, if the money was there, the professionals would be there too.
Did that answer your question? Do we have any other questions?
Well, if anyone wants a question, I have a question, I guess. I think that the nature of this workshop is really to see the impact of mental health on the youth and how actually the problem being developed in the schools or in the families with a child which is mentally maybe have some kind of problems, and also the social media, how the children look over the Facebook or other stuff which I'm not really very familiar with it, but and also how they be treated in the schools, about bullying and people who, and this leave a lot of negative on the child itself, which is really, I like to know from each one of you, if you have any communication between your department or your office or between your organization with the school district and with the doctors here in towns, and how we can really predict these problems from the beginning and not leading us or leading them to have this, as I mentioned to Dr. Parker before, this incident which is taking place in Texas and taking place in Las Vegas, taking place overseas, everywhere it's happening, and part of it is the mental health. Part of it is the sickness, which is people, really, if they can predict it from the beginning and try to treat it in the school, in the offices and in organization, they can prevent a lot of bloodshed, and they can prevent a lot of people who's not feeling inferiority complex in society and not active as a good citizen in the society. So I will leave that for each one to elaborate on that as ending. Thank you.
Oh, that's a big thing to cover. I guess I think of this, first of all, I work for a Life Management Center, and yes, we have a lot of communication with the schools. We get a lot of our referrals from the schools, but this whole issue is a community issue. No one organization can tackle all of this. I know the schools are asking for training to identify potential mental health issues for children in their schools so that they'll know what to do to help. There's mental health first aid training that's offered here locally for adults and youth, for people who are not mental health practitioners, but for people in the community so that they can learn how to identify a potential mental health issue in anyone and kind of know how to help. Not to be a mental health clinician, but to know what to do in any setting. None of this is going to resolve itself unless, as I said, we all work on it together. It's just a huge issue. I mean, Dr. Bach has a private practice, but she also helps us because the need is so dire. There's a nationwide shortage of psychiatrists, child psychiatrists in particular. So she has been very gracious to help us out. So, and I reached out to her because of her connection with my husband, who also works in this field at Anchorage Children's Home. So we've just all got to tackle these issues together. And you know, for parents, I've worked with parents for a long time who waited for a while to get treatment for their kid. And I've learned as a parent and working with parents, if it feels wrong, if you're like, something doesn't feel right, then I'm just gonna ride it out. That if it doesn't feel right, it's not right. And that's what I tell people: to get help now, don't wait, because the earlier the better. I mean, I think we all said that. The sooner the better.
Okay, so we have about 1 minute.
Okay, I would just second what Eileen said. I think this is a community issue. No one agency can take care of the enormity of the problem. And there are very limited financial resources for mental health treatment nationally.
Thank you so much. There is one last question.
As it is said, you know, like you all said that mental health is the stigma, even in an educated society, like you were saying, it's still a stigma. So if you see a child or even a teenager that you feel, how do you approach the child with what? Not without hurting the feelings or without making them feel that they have something wrong with them. Anyone?
Like just in the general population?
Yeah, I mean, just like, say if I see a child and I see that there's something not right, say 14, 15-year-old, and I know it's going to not sit well with the child, how do you approach the child as a parent, as a teacher, you know, whichever is best you're in?
Well, adolescence was who I worked with the most, and what I learned is they appreciate just being real. And so, you know, they can smell a fake a mile away. So if you have concerns, I mean, they would most of the teens I worked with wouldn't be offended if you said, you know, I know you, I can see something's not okay. I'm here to talk if you want to. I'm not going to make you, but the door is always open. Or encourage them to talk to somebody that they do feel comfortable with.
With that, we'll end our presentation today. Did you have something?
Oh, I was just going to say, and if they're initially defensive, don't let it hurt your feelings. It's not personal. Just let them know you're concerned about them, and you can be happy to help them anyway.
And that they may take that with them and never tell you about it, that you stepped in and you asked how they were doing, and that may be meaningful to them in a way you'll never know, even if they blew you off completely.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There's definitely a positive and negative side to any social phenomenon or scenario, and the golden rule of moderation is always important to keep in mind. We hope you took away some important information today. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to thank the panelists, Avicenna Free Clinic, and Gulf Coast Community College for organizing this great presentation. The workshop is adjourned. Thank you.